Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. I'm excited this time to have another Keeper of Arcane Lore here on the website, Cuppy Cup from Ain't Slayed Nobody. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Hello, everybody. Howdy, I'll say, since we run down darker
There we
trails.
go. There we go. See, I'm a Texan, and so howdy has a special meaning for me. It's a special. I'm always glad to hear it. Uh, so Cup runs down darker trails for the very entertaining Ain't Slayed Nobody. You guys have actually you have a kind of a rotating keeper system, I guess.
Yeah, so our main arc is down darker trails. We call that Call of Cthulhu, and I'm the keeper for that. But we do a lot of one shots, which usually take about 3 episodes, and we've played all kinds of different stuff. We do modern Cthulhu. We've done classic 1920s. On Patreon, we play World War Cthulhu London, so we have a
So
decent
good.
range.
I love the character creation in World War Cthulhu. I think it adds some nice twists to the whole things.
Absolutely.
So, uh, so you were just telling me before we started that you're relatively new to being a GM. I ask everybody to start off with, how did you get your start GMing?
Okay, so our
So
history is,
yesterday.
yeah, kind of. So we launched in January 2020 and recorded our first session December 2019. So just before really the pandemic hit. And that was my first session ever, was the recorded podcast, session 0 and session 1 of Ain't Slayed Nobody. Before that, I had played one online game of D&D, which that was about a year prior, that was intended to be a podcast called Ain't Slayed Nobody. But we just kind of that stalled, and a year later I got the itch to do it. I was not the GM for that, but I decided I wanted to do something more in the horror genre. So I kind of picked up Call of Cthulhu and ran with it. Saw Down Darker Trails and thought that seemed like a very compelling setting. So that's kind of the genesis for it. I think there are a lot of good and bad things about being new to it and jumping right into a podcast, but it's been an experience. I think the timing of the pandemic, as weird as it sounds, it kind of worked out well for us because it gave us a release from all the heavy things that life was throwing at us. We had this kind of release and, meeting at least monthly to record the podcast. So it became, we became a very tight knit group over the course of recording season 1.
So not only was this your kind of introduction to GMing, but it's kind of, your introduction to RPGs in general.
Exactly.
Huh.
And I don't know how they missed me, because I was certainly in, like, the cliques in middle school and high school that should have been playing tabletop role-playing games. I don't know how it missed us, but it never caught on at the schools where I was, or at least I didn't get exposure to them. I knew some kids in college who played, but I never really got into it. I was more into video games and computer games, I think. So I'm really glad I found it, even though I'm doing it later in life. And I'm kind of sad that I didn't get into it earlier, to be honest.
And so you've never actually played, you've never run at a table.
That's true. That's exactly right.
Huh.
I'm supposed to go to Chaosium Con this year in April, depending on Omicron and all the
The
other
world.
things. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But if I do get to go to that in person, I do plan to run some games while I'm there.
It's, for me, the pandemic has been hard because I really feed off the energy at the table. Like, it's just a whole different thing being at the table with players and that sort of thing, and not for me the same experience looking at Zoom boxes and
Yeah.
but that's really fascinating. Well, first of all, nice job,
Thank
because
you.
I really like the way that you run your game, and a few things especially that I appreciate. You have a really good sense for camera time, for that little clock that says, hey, we haven't heard from this player in a while, that sort of thing.
Good.
Is that something you consciously work at, or is it just something that Sometimes you'd rather be lucky than good.
Yeah, so it's actually interesting because our show I think is a blend of the experience that we have during our recording session and editing to make up for all the stuff that I'm not good at because I'm new to this. So I think that, especially early on in season one, I relied more on the heavy handed editing when I was looking up a lot of rules in the rule book and things like that. Or maybe I was neglecting a player for longer than I should have. I could fix that in post. But I think that now that we've been doing this for a couple of years, which just sounds amazing to say now. I think there's much less of that. There's less heavy-handed editing, and yeah, camera time is interesting because being that we recorded online and that it was during a pandemic when people's schedules would just get kind of tossed to pieces depending on what's going on in their personal lives. We had instances where players had to miss a session or had to miss two sessions. So trying to write that into the game was kind of a challenge. Being a podcast, I think it would have been easier if we were just running a game for fun and we didn't have an audience depending on us delivering this, something entertaining to them. But yeah, I think it's something I've grown more conscious of. I have actually played games now with a lot of experienced keepers and learned from them. I think Scott Dorward is probably the keeper I've played with the most. He's pretty well known and a contributor to a lot of writing for Chaosium and other systems as well. But he's really good at pacing and giving people the spotlight when they need it. So I think that just playing with people like that has really helped me grow as a keeper.
Mm. And so how much of what you're doing is homebrew and how much of what you're doing is written content? Because I mean, there is a fair amount of content for Down Darker Trails, although really only one campaign.
Right. We have not used any of the written Down Darker Trails content. We've used the setting information and things like that, of course, but all of that's homebrew. We did use, I think it was episodes 5 and 6 and maybe a little bit of 7. We used a Cthulhu Britannica scenario to influence a bunch of scenes that we had in a cave system, but that didn't come from DDT. Other than that, it's all been homebrew. Season 1 I was actually going to run Shadows over Stillwater. That was my intention, was to have episode 1 be something unique and then jump into to that scenario. But Will Baser, who joined kind of in the middle of editing episode 1, convinced me to do a custom campaign, and he created his own, BBEG for our campaign and did a lot of upfront writing for it. And we worked together very closely throughout the campaign. And in the second half of the season, Graham Patrick, another writer, joined on and started, as we got into the really scary stuff, started to help us kind of beef up the scenario aspect of what we were going into sessions with. So it's all been homebrew. Season 2 is all homebrew. Graham is actually writing sessions out as scenarios. So maybe we can even find a path to publishing after season 2 with the way that he's doing really that. Neat. There are pros and cons to that. We were basically going month to month. We didn't have any backlog of episodes for season 1. So the challenge was, you're trying to write something unique, prep it, deliver an entertaining game to the players, and also edit it. So I was just felt like I was under the gun all the time. Now that Graham is kind of writing scenarios well in advance of when they'll be published, I wouldn't call it relaxed, but feels more reasonable, at least, to manage.
So walk me through your prep for a session.
Okay,
what's your prep time look like? What are you doing to prep for it?
That's a good question, and it's evolved. So I'll give you kind of my end of 2021 prep, which I think is a little bit better than what we were doing at the beginning of season 1. So Graham will write out a scenario and send it to me before it's polished for feedback, and I'll give him some feedback, and he'll kind of tighten everything up and send it back to me. And then I really prep it similar to the way I would a one-shot if I was just sitting down and reading a scenario for the first time, going through it the first time and making notes, going through it again to really get some depth out of it and start thinking about, what kind of cool exposition might I be able to add to different scenes and kind of coming up with flowcharts in my head. But then I'll do something a little more systematic now, which is I take the whole scenario. I don't know if it's efficient, but it works for me. And I dump the whole thing into OneNote, which is this Microsoft app that I don't know if anybody uses it anymore, but it allows me to do cross linking and things like that. So if I have a saloon scene open and I know that these NPCs are there, I can click on the NPC name and it'll drop me into their description, and then it links back to the saloon and all the places where I expect them to appear. So it just makes me better on the fly. And it's kind of balancing that with improvisation, because there are a lot of things that happen in the moment. Players are always surprising you, obviously, and killing NPCs and moving them and things like that. So just kind of adjusting on the fly. And what I'm trying to do now is write good summary notes of what happened so that we kind of keep the threads alive throughout the campaign. I think one weakness, not a weakness, but something that might be evident in season 1 is that in the middle of the season, we lost some threads, and then we got back to them as we got toward the end of the campaign. And, they ended up being cool callbacks, but they probably should have been things we were reminding the players and the audience of throughout the season. So I'm trying to be more conscious of that.
And, how do you, it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like your GMing style is a little more, I don't mean this pejoratively, a little more prescribed, sort of. Not so, not so much the on the fly stuff comes from just listening to what the players do and kind of bouncing off that and that sort of thing. How do you kind of balance having, okay, I've got a pretty good structure here, but my players are going to go left every time and throw me off, and so I'm just going to throw all of this away.
Right. Yeah. So it really depends on the session. I think that it very rarely goes as prescribed as I kind of have it laid out in OneNote. It's really just kind of a basis. So, the first time we go to the saloon, then a lot of those things are relevant and interesting. But the second and third time they go there, I'm not even opening it because I know that none of that stuff's relevant anymore. So I think it's just a matter of me trying to be attuned to what the players are looking for from a scene, or what they're kind of looking for from a conversation, and adapting to that. So balancing the structure with the improvisational nature of a role-playing game is, I think it's something I get better at every time we play. Some sessions at the end, I'll think about it and, kind of, I could have done this better. I should have thrown this at them, or, and I think you get better from that kind of introspection between sessions. But it was interesting though, because early on in season 1, we were so disorganized at times that it was forced to be improvisational. And I think some of that worked really well, and some of it didn't, and it got edited out for, it didn't fit with the story, whatever it was. I let them look at a rock for 4 hours, whatever happened. But I think there's a trade-off there. And I talked about Scott Dorward earlier. He writes scenarios, so he obviously is keen to the structure, but he improvises almost everything. We're in the middle of a 17-page scenario he wrote, and we're on session 20. So it's all improvised after we got past kind of the first couple of scenes. So I'm kind of, I think, there's kind of a spectrum of GMing styles. I think I'm pretty close to the middle in terms of, okay, this is like by the book railroading style GMing, and this is completely wild improvisation. I think I'm in the middle, but maybe still more on the side of following structure than on the improvisational side, I would say.
Yeah. I have to admit, I've shown this before, but I'll just, let's see here. My GMing style is, can I find one? Yeah. So I will have, this won't show up. I have 3 bullet points that are this session, and I'll be like, all right, there's a plane crash. We know they're going to get there. Then, the plantation kidnapping, and then the museum, that's like that. And count on the players to get me there. But that, that's still prep time, because to get to that point for improvisation, you have to be really comfortable with, okay, the plane. I know all the details about the plane crash so that I can let people get there and that sort of thing. And so I always want to be careful when you talk about improvising as a GM. It doesn't mean you're not prepping. There's still a lot of prep work. It just
Exactly.
means the prep is going in a different direction. And the hard part is doing prep and then just being willing to let it go.
Yeah. Yep.
Because you're not going to get to the plane crash this time. Or in the case of of the Great Danes with I was going to run Shadows over Stillwater, and they were just like, nope, not interested. Like as soon as the fireworks started going off and bad things, they're just like, we're leaving. And so I literally on stream threw the book over my shoulder, and I'm like, well, here we go.
That's cool.
I'm not doing that.
Yeah, now that point's well taken. So yeah, it's a different type of prep. And I think that to be more improvisational experience as part of that, I would be much more comfortable running a game with no notes today than I would have a month after we started, of course. But it's, for me, I think that what I had to kind of grow into was exactly what you said, just being willing to throw things out that I was prepared to do. So I may have this really cool NPC that, 3 of us have worked on, and I just say, okay, that NPC is not happening. It's just, it's not going to happen. We, our main town, Oviedo, New Mexico, which is fictional, in season 1, Will and I built out a lot of buildings and NPCs and descriptions and things like that. And we kind of had scenes we expected to take place in each of the buildings. And almost none of it happened because of the way the players handled town. Our players are kind of aggressive for Call of Cthulhu, less of the investigative type players, at least in season 1. So I thought they were going to go into this town with guns blazing, and we had plans for what to do in the jail and in the saloon and places where they usually go. But by then I had started to do more things that made them more reticent, I think. And, they were a little more gun shy than they had been. So they became more investigative right when I expected them not to be. So we moved so many things around in Oviedo as a result of that. And I think the show was better for it because it helped me do better improv work, and it let the players guide the whole story, which is ultimately, I think what you want at the end of the day is for them to tell the story that they want to tell.
Yeah. There's 2 things that jumped out at me there, and I'm going to say them both so that we can hit them both. But one is, I wanted to ask you about player input in sort of your whole system. And then also I want to talk about how Down Darker Trails is different from normal Call of Cthulhu. But let's start with the players. And so how do I want to ask this question? So where does player feedback, you ran us through kind of the prep cycle there. Yeah. So where does player feedback sort of fit in there?
Yeah, for me, it's very dependent on the player. And my process in season 1 is much different than it is now after kind of knowing what's going on in season 2. So in season 1, we really only had 2 player characters that even had developed backstories at all, which, it was okay. Everyone grew into their character and kind of figured it out on the fly. But in season 2, I sent out, and one of the players actually really helped me put this together, Rena Henze. We sent out player questionnaires. So we asked lots of questions. So the first section was safety. So we asked them about, what topics they're comfortable with, what they're going to redline, what we need to discuss in advance.
Great.
Exactly. So that we would all have awareness of that in advance. And the second part was a questionnaire about the character, and it was very detailed. Some of the questions were optional, but I wanted to know, who has your player character killed before? What experiences have they had with strange entities? What are their hopes and dreams? What are their nightmares? What's their family history? And it was just, do they like dogs or cats? Who was your first kiss? It was really just to get them in the mindset of who can I make this player character, making them feel more attached to them. And, of course, some of those things, when they write really deep backstories, are going to come back to haunt them in a game of Call of Cthulhu. But I think that when they feel attached to that, it makes it really fun. And that's what they're looking for from a game of Call of Cthulhu. Another thing I learned, I didn't really step over this line, but it was something that I think more happened inside my brain. And I had a big shift from, maybe the first part of season 1 thereafter, was that I want to scare the player character. I don't necessarily want to scare the player. I don't want to be hitting their lines and veils because I'm trying to get a reaction out of them. I want to work with what the player character is afraid of and what the player is comfortable with. So I think that I've grown some in that sense as a GM. We were fortunate to avoid those kind of issues, but it was something that I think consciously I flipped the switch maybe a little less than halfway through season 1. But the player packet, the questionnaire, building a packet, that is awesome. And I think it's made, season
really
2,
clever,
we haven't released it yet, but I think that the players are so deep now that it's really cool. And, we're going to be really sad if we lose any of them early.
Well, so that's actually a question. Season 2, you have 8 PCs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are they, is this a rotating gang or something, or is everybody there all the time?
Yeah, so it's risky, and I think it's interesting. It's not quite a West Marches style of play, but it's certainly going to be a split party style of play. The setup, which actually this is the first place I've ever mentioned this. So the setup is that they're traveling performers. So I think that gives us a lot of room to separate them and send them different places. And we actually have them in, they kind of all work through the same camp initially, and then they go to different towns and get in different adventures. And the idea is to have the party intermingle in different ways throughout the season. So it's not that you're in this group of 3 and you'll always be in that group of 3. It's more like you'll be in this group for this town. You'll all come back together. We might split you out again. But I feel like very rarely are we going to have all 8 people on, StreamYard together or on Zoom together. And I think there's some risk there because you mentioned earlier spotlighting and screen time, camera time, and even just holding the audience's attention.
Yeah, 8 boxes is a lot of boxes.
Yeah, exactly. So, it was a conscious decision. I was very happy with the season 1 cast. I wanted to bring everyone along who wanted to participate in season 2. So I invited them all back, but I had the opportunity to play with a bunch of really cool people that I wanted to bring in for season 2. So we added Bridget Jeffries, London Carlisle, and Rena Henze to the cast for season 2. And they're fantastic. I mean, they all add so much to the show that I think that even with the risk of having a big cast, it's worth it. It's a little more challenging on the editing side and just trying to figure out, well, when are we going to record sessions and when are different players going to be in the same group together and how are we going to keep the audience interested in all these different arcs. I kind of thought of it like a television show. Like, you think of Game of Thrones and they have 10 different things going on at once. Well, right. If they can do that, I feel like on a podcast, I can have 2 different things going on at once, or maybe. So
are you cross-cutting stories at this point, or are you kind of, this episode is going to be these 4 people, this episode's going to be...
Yeah. It'll be a mix. So it depends what's going on. But I think most of them will be cross-cut, where you're going to get some scenes from, this town where these PCs are, and you'll get a little bit from the other town. If it's something big is happening, maybe there's a huge combat scene or something like that, then maybe it will just focus on the one group. But I've just started editing season 2, so it's hard to say right now. I think that, whatever... I'm very meticulous with my editing, so I'll try it a lot of different ways. And I think whatever, I'm going to kind of go with my gut and probably have some people sample it before we make it public. I'm going to go with it and kind of gauge the audience reaction and be adaptive if I can.
The editing part to me is really interesting because pretty much everything we do at Quests and Chaos is live stream.
Yep.
and so we edit almost nothing. There's one. The redacted reports is its own thing, but it is a very kind of performance, very edited, very soundscape, cool sound editing, awesome stuff. But everything else is just sort of live stream, and
Yeah.
so what happens happens, and
Yep.
you sort of you don't get the chance to kind of go back and like say, oh, what I meant was,
Yeah.
and so I think the editing stuff, definitely not a skill I have or am good at, but I think it's really interesting. And how do you do you let the players know how you're editing stuff, or because there's the old story about how an actor goes and sees a movie and that they were in,
Yeah.
and he's like, I don't remember any of this.
Yeah, I'm laughing because we've had some, I won't call them controversies, but the little bit of conflict that we've had as a group, some of it has come from editing, and
Yeah.
I think that memory factors into it. So sometimes I'll send people the raw audio and say, look, I didn't edit out what you think I edited out.
Right.
But I think just like we talked about, there's a spectrum of GM styles there. For podcasts, there's a spectrum of editing, and you have, I think, like Dark Dice and shows like that are very heavily edited and feel more like audio drama than tabletop role playing. And then the other side, which is like you all, which is just completely improvised. You're at the table and you get the real experience. And I think there's a lot of value in both. We're somewhere in the middle. I think we're the more we go, the more we're skewing toward audio drama. But I want it to feel like a game where you're at the table, but it's just a tighter game that I'm capable of running. So I keep bringing up Scott Dorward because I have so much admiration for him. But when I edit Meat Trade, which he runs, I'm cutting very little from that because he's very good. And I'll cut out ums and double words and things like that, and reduce the volume of laughter. But it's very minimal editing. When I'm editing myself, I'm like moving things around and shifting scenes around, and it's much more dramatic. But I think that editing is kind of fun for me. I'm an obsessive editor. I like to have like an aha moment in editing where I say, oh my gosh, if I splice these scenes together, it's going to have such an impact on the audience. And, adding sound effects and music behind that, even doing voice replacement, which I think is the most heavy handed thing I do, especially when I play female NPCs. I cannot do the roles justice. I think it's okay for the at-home tabletop experience, but for sending it out to a wide audience, like I want an actress who's going to do this role justice. So we'll do some voice replacement for that. And we're actually starting to experiment with live NPCs in season 2. So
I love that idea.
The voice actors and actresses, they will be in the show live. So it's not a voice replacement style NPC. But
I don't want to toot my own horn, but in our Masks run, I had a female NPC that was flirting enough with another character to make them uncomfortable. I was I don't know, are you familiar with Masks at all?
So I've never played it, so I'm scared to listen to something all the way through. So I'll sample different podcasts that were playing it.
Well, there's a female villain, possible villain in the China part that that I really enjoyed playing. That was a lot of fun. That was, although I do have I don't know what this says about me, but it seems like every time I play a woman, they are not a nice person.
Okay.
There might be some things I need to work through there. I don't know. I'll have to ask my wife.
Sure.
So the editing stuff. So what software do you use to edit?
It's funny. This is a big thing in our Discord now. So I've just 2 days ago, I switched from Audition to Reaper, and I like both, but I'm in love with Reaper right now because it auto fades cuts. So in Audition, I have to fade every cut that I make manually, and Reaper just does that automatically, which when you're doing thousands of cuts over the course of a season, that time really adds up. So I'm very into Reaper right now and writing custom shortcuts, and it's it's kind of wild how much time I'm saving with that. But we're gonna do bi-weekly in season 2, and we were monthly in season 1. So, you know, just to keep my home life reasonable,
Yeah.
I need to be more efficient with editing, and that's either going to involve hiring an editor or getting more efficient myself. So right now it's maybe going to be a mix of both, kind of looking into things.
And not to jump into current RPG discourse, but editing podcasts is a beautiful thing. And if I will ask at the end, and once we're done recording, I will ask Cup, is there anything, because this is a stream, I don't really edit it, but if the guest, I ask every guest if there's something they didn't like that came out or something like that, I will happily remove it.
Sure.
So, dude who doesn't edit, who says podcasts aren't edited, you are wrong. Uh,
Yeah.
that was an aside. That aside will make no sense in about 2 weeks. Like
Yeah,
that is very.
No, I do think another thing about editing is that I think that, so one thing you try to maintain at the table is trust. And one thing that I think helps me as a novice keeper is to be able to assure the players that if there is something they're not proud of or that they need cut, it's going to be edited. So I'll take it out. Now, we haven't had much of that. We've had some borderline stuff where I was like, maybe it would be better if we cut this out. But it is a nice kind of fallback if you're not having your best moment in that live session as a group. You do have that fallback of taking things out. Now, we've played a lot of live games too on Twitch and on Patreon, and it's fine. It's different. It's a different style. We have a little bit of a different audience for the two different styles as well, or two different mediums, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Personally, I use the X card for that when I'm doing live games, where I'm just like, if anything's happening you don't like, the X card is there. And, I am a very, I run a very light and jokey table, but the X card is the one thing that I never joke about. Like that
Absolutely.
is the one thing that is super important. And so I love the idea, because we banter probably too much. We have a 3-hour slot and I have an hour and a half of content,
Yes.
so we're gonna, there's gonna be some banter, and I think editing could really help that out. But that would also be a lot of work.
Yeah,
like, I'm super impressed with the amount of work you do to edit all that down and keep it going.
And we have funny people on the show, so it is, like you're saying, it's a lot more banter than you're getting in the final release, because sometimes I want the tone to kind of hit a certain way, especially Call of Cthulhu. If we're in this very serious nightmare sequence, I'll let some jokes in at the beginning, but at some point I want that to become tense for the audience. So I may cut out some pop culture references, or,
right.
We're not the table that's going to be super serious the whole time. I know there are tables that do that and they pull it off well and it's fun for them, but we all come from kind of comedy blogging backgrounds, so the tendency to joke around with each other is there. And a lot of the jokes get cut. Obviously the best ones stay, the most timely ones stay, and some of the terrible ones stay too, just because maybe they relieve tension at the right moment.
I think that's a great point, is that I actually think humor is super important in a horror game, because that juxtaposition and B, relieving tension are critical. And if it's just constant, just bam, 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 hammering you over the head with tension and depression and sadness and woe, that's too one note. Now you can go the same way, and I think some would very successfully argue that perhaps our stream has gone that way of, it's a comedy with some minor horror elements, and that's all stylistic, and to your point, there's a spectrum there, and everywhere on that spectrum there's, to use a crass term, there's a market, and you can, everybody can find their niche.
Yeah, I like some of my British friends who play. They call those podcasts laddish, where they're just telling like childish jokes all the time. And we certainly have our share of that. But I think through editing and through just growth as a team in building this podcast, I think every game has seasons. In a one shot, those seasons might all occur in one recording.
Yeah.
But in a campaign, I think that, the first third of our season is very much spring and summer, and the last 5 episodes are dark winter. So, some jokes are in there, but it's definitely not as lighthearted as the very early part of the season.
So how do you deal with, uh, uh, not plot armor, but you create these characters that become, uh, uh, I don't think this is an exaggeration, become beloved. Like people
Yeah.
really like these characters, and then you come upon the sort of the crux of the mechanic of Call of Cthulhu, which is death or insanity awaits us all.
Right.
And how do you kind of walk that tightrope?
Yeah, I love that question because it's something that I think we think about a lot kind of on our own as keepers, but we don't really get to express it to anyone else. But for me, I think that at some point around our 4th episode, I decided that I was just going to let the players and the dice tell the story. So we certainly, based on the backstories they created and some things that Will and I had come up with, we had some player characters who had a lot more plot armor than others if you're just looking at the story. But we almost lost a main character very early, and I was willing to let that happen, knowing that we could adapt. And, I had a month in between sessions. I knew that we could pull something else together, send them in a different direction, build up different types of motivations, maybe even using a backup character, reintroduce some of the same plot elements through that backup character if it's a relative or something like that. But yeah, I think that it's interesting in a campaign, especially, a character death or, hitting 0 on sand can really send the whole story in a tailspin and can really anger the audience. I think one of the most surprising things for me is that, inevitably in Call of Cthulhu, bad things happen eventually to some of the characters. And people were, I wouldn't say they were mad at me, but they were certainly projecting anger in the kind of immediate time following the release of the episodes. There was someone on Discord tonight who binged the season, and they're at the next to last episode, and they were like, "What are you doing? Why? How could you do this?" And it's just something that we bring in listeners who don't know Call of Cthulhu just because we all had built up followings from elsewhere. And I don't think that they were all fully prepared for where it was going. In season 2, they'll be more ready, but I do think that I was a little bit gun shy in season 1 with some of the characters. Early on, they did some very stupid things that probably should have been punished more harshly, but I let them skate because I was just thinking, oh gosh, what are we going to do if we lose this character at this point? But at the same time, I tried to have that willingness to let them go if there was that inevitability. But I might have been more lenient than I should have been.
Well, I see. It's funny, and I think this is again a personal kind of covenant with you and the table. But for me, like a senseless death, doesn't serve anything. Like we are telling a story, and for that story, and for you are protagonists. So if we're gonna lose a protagonist, that has to mean something.
Yeah.
Now, it could mean that you need to learn that the big bad guy is a badass, and that's fine.
Yep.
But I would always, before a player dies, I'm going to have talked with that player, out of session, or we're going to stop the session, and I'm going to be like, hey, this could happen. Are you, is this where you want to go? And that conversation is very different player to player.
Yeah.
I have one player who he wants he's like, yeah, this is my time, take me now, and then I have people who are very kind of protective of their character and don't want anything to happen to them, and so it's a really interesting have when to sort of have that conversation and to say, like, is this the time? Is a tough. That's another tightrope.
I'm glad you brought that up because earlier I talked about when they arrived in Oviedo, which was our main town, and I expected them to go in guns blazing. Part of that I left out was that's when we had the big conversation
Right.
before that session was that, look, we're getting into it now. Things can happen to your characters. I just want you to be aware. And I think that affected them more than I expected it to. So, it kind of took some time. But I do feel like every incident that happened was meaningful and that the player at least got some moment of glory or gratification out of it. I'm not saying they were all 100% thrilled with how and when it happened, but I do think that they at least had that spotlight moment where they could do something really cool and make it meaningful. And that means a lot to players that you're being mindful of what they're getting out of the situation, because I think they know that I'm also trying to reach an audience with something that's interesting, and balancing that can be challenging. But I think what I've learned over time is that when you serve the players, they give you a better game to give to the audience. So
Yeah.
really it has to focus on them.
Yeah. So have you run regular Cthulhu? Regular Cthulhu. I don't even know what that term means. Have you run stuff that isn't Down Darker Trails?
Yes. So I ran, it's mostly just one shot scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
So I've run, let's see, Stalker in the Moonlit Mall was 1980s
Yeah, that's great.
Cincinnati shopping mall, and just a handful of others. The Dead Border, which is kind of a really quick one shot through the Cult of Chaos. But yeah, just a handful here and there. But since I do the main arc, I spend a lot of time in the Down Darker Trails space.
Because I really think Down Darker Trails has some interesting existential structural differences from Cthulhu that make it a totally different game.
Yes.
And I think one of the big ones is that it's just most of the characters aren't good at investigation. You
Yes.
don't have the there's not libraries in every town that are stocked full of Mythos tomes.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting, like for me that is a really weird difference, and leads to a lot more going in guns blazing.
Yes. I think that helped us because of the type of players that I have, at least my season one group at the time that we were starting, because it was a little more pulpy and they could jump more into the action, which is what they were, a couple of them had played some D&D. So, they were more like murder hobo kind of approach. And we eased off that as we moved into the season a little bit. But I chose Call of Cthulhu, I think, because it was kind of sitting number 2 or number 3 for RPGs, saturated but not D&D saturated. And I picked it because it was horror. And Brandon Waynardi, who's one of our cast members, he was doing work with Fangoria at the time, and I was like, oh, this is cool. So we can work together, put this horror show together. And it was always my favorite genre of books and movies as a kid. So that's what drew me to Call of Cthulhu. What drew me to Down Darker Trails, other than just kind of an affinity for Westerns and kind of that type of storytelling, one was that I couldn't find really any established shows that were running Down Darker Trails. It was relatively new. And also I felt like with that setting, you can tell a very compelling story with no monsters. So even when nothing's happening with cosmic horrors, just the gunfight at the saloon, or the basic trying to survive the West, this human versus nature element that is inherent in the setting. I thought that would help me narratively get through a campaign where that obviously you can tell interesting stories in the 20s and in the modern era anytime, but I felt like I would be more comfortable in the West.
Yeah, it's the setting itself almost becomes a character in
Yes.
that regard, which I quite like as well. And it's kind of fun to there's so many I don't know. in some ways, everyone in the Old West is a jerk, and that's just fun to play.
Sure.
It's just like there's no everyone is like, and they all have guns.
Yeah.
So you're like gonna let them be a jerk, and unless you can be a tougher jerk, and
Yeah.
that's this whole that sense of that whole weird hierarchy,
Yes.
and how I was really inspired, as I'm sure anybody who plays Down Darker Trails, by Red Dead Revolution. I'm saying the darn games.
No worries.
The Rockstar video game,
Yep.
which so much of that story is sort of the new world and the old world, and I
Yes.
really loved that. The sort of the rich financiers that were taking everything over, and kind of the money that was proving to be more dangerous than anybody with guns and that sort of thing. I thought that was a
Yeah.
really neat take.
I probably should mention that as an influence because this is going to be like the worst brag of all time, but I was in the top 50 players in the world for the online Red Dead Redemption. And
Nice.
I was between levels of school, and I had like 4 months just to kind of get prepared for grad school.
PlayStation
And
or Xbox?
Xbox. And I just played Red Dead Redemption all day. And my wife still talks about it, like how much time I wasted playing that game. It got to the point where other players would accuse me of cheating when it was really just that I played so much. It was all just kind of muscle memory and, almost embarrassing how good I got at that game. But certainly like that vibe is something that attracted me. And I think that it influenced probably my choice of what kind of game to run. I also love the idea that you can walk into a hotel or something like that, and you can be a player character and you're nasty to an NPC. They're armed. It's just a regular person, but they're armed and they can do something about it. So I think that it kind of gives empowerment to the NPCs, and I like that uncertainty in the game. I think it's been a lot of fun.
And the dichotomy between lawlessness and lawfulness in the Old West, of like, the marshal who can do whatever, and just that the power of that badge versus sometimes the lack of power of that badge. I knew I wanted to have like at least one town where the marshal was essentially a tyrant running everything.
Absolutely.
And at least one town where the marshal was like feckless and completely powerless, just for that whole difference.
That's cool. Yeah, I think one of my favorite episodes of ours, it had nothing to do with horror or cosmic horror. I called it Down Darker Trials. So the gang was on trial for things that they had done up to that point. And I built this little mechanism for basically how to evaluate their innocence or guilt. But the whole thing was basically inside the courtroom in the Old West, this power dynamic between the judge, the sheriff, and some of the NPCs who were there as witnesses, and then also the player characters. It was that was our most controversial internally episode because of like what I let them or didn't let them get away with in the trial. But it's a lot of fun, and a lot of listeners gave us feedback on that particular episode, which, it wasn't really in the kind of Call of Cthulhu genre.
I mean, look, consequences for actions is good drama, and it's good role playing. And the Old West, I think, lends itself to that, because you in the 1920s, it's hard to be a murder hobo. Lord knows my players have tried, but it's hard. But in the Old West, you could sort of be a murder hobo, but there's going to be a posse after you.
Yes.
You're going to be wanted, and so there's a sense of accountability, and I think that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I think Rena, who actually they joined us for season 2 now with the cast, but I think they commented that like how are the player characters going to get away with all this stuff? And that's what inspired the courtroom. I said, well, maybe they won't. Maybe we'll put them on trial and have this stuff happen. And it shook out so that there was a good opportunity to take them into custody and put them on trial. So we had a lot of fun with that. And, just that kind of stuff, I think, adds an interesting flavor using Down Darker Trails as a setting. I think that now that we're known for that, for our main arc, I'm happy to go back to it for our main arc, but I like the other settings. I love playing modern day. I know Scott, who runs a lot of stuff for us, he likes modern day. So I think Unland
My
was
problem with
something.
modern day is that the cell phone solves so many problems.
Yeah, that's the problem. I was just about to talk about Unland, which is a scenario Scott wrote for, I think, Fear's Sharp Little Needles. It's in a theme park, but there's no cell phone reception, right? So a lot of times the scenario writers will find a way to take that out of the equation.
Right. Right.
But I love that. Like I just like the amusement park vibe, and I like playing different settings. I don't know that we'll always have a main arc down darker trails, but right now it's a lot of fun, and it could overlap with Gaslight too, because that's what's happening across the ocean
Yeah,
right
that's
now.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see.
So it's interesting. You're relatively new to this. Do you have you started to develop house rules? Have you started to develop kind of you talked about that mechanic for the courtroom.
Yeah.
Have you started to sort of change things for the story you want to tell?
Yeah, I think I'm more in the process of thinking about things that could work better rather than implementing them. We've done things more on a limited basis. One thing we've done is implemented a bout of radness, where if a player does something extraordinarily cool, then they'll get bonus die in particular categories of skills for an amount of time. So it's not all punishment. Like you can actually be rewarded for the way that you role play or whatever the case may be. So, trying to think of things like that the players will really get into. I'm kind of toying with that. Other than that, all of my house rules are borrowed, like capping skills at 75 and just kind of little details like that to make the game run more smoothly. I will say I'm running a hybrid of Pulp and regular Call of Cthulhu for season 2. So the player characters, they do have special talents, Pulp talents, but I'm not using all the Pulp luck rules. So it's kind of a hybrid of the two.
We really enjoyed the Pulp talents. Added a neat kind of weird, like it's the Pulp talents in the character creation turned one of my players into a clone.
Okay.
He decided he was a clone, and so in the first episode he died, and then they met another one.
That's cool.
And that, like, just because of his Pulp talent, and we he came up with this idea. I'm like, I love it. I'll kill you in the first one, and then we'll meet another. And now they've met like 7 of him.
Yeah, even the names of the Pulp talents, I think, help the players visualize what their character's like. So if you're strong as an ox or you're a quick draw, it just kind of gives you this mental representation of the type of character that you're playing. So I like it for that. Of course, it makes the story become more pulpy and maybe more of that guns blazing, double-fisted action that we were talking about. But I've seen some benefit to it, especially, I mentioned we're doing kind of performance troops in season 2. That really lends itself well to the pulpy vibe.
It does, yeah. How do you? So I have a little bit of how. So I struggle at times with the both the terminology and the functionality of the sanity mechanic in Call of Cthulhu. Now, maybe coming at it from a new player, that's not. I don't know, but like I find that a lot of the sanity mechanic is a little retrograde. And perhaps not approaching the subject matter with the with the care that it probably needs.
Yeah, it's interesting because kind of coming at it with a beginner's mindset, I think, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the sanity mechanic is basically the same as the one they implemented with Edition 1 in 1981 or whenever that was.
Yeah.
So at first, I was just so worried about knowing how to play and knowing the rules that I didn't give it a lot of thought. But then once we started putting it in action, I think I got some small signs that there might be some things that need to be tweaked. My first deep thought about it was when we played Cthulhu Dark, and they used to have a sanity mechanic, but now it's called Insight. And
Right.
I thought insight is a really cool way to think about it because it's more about your exposure to the mythos. And I think that, is it Prospero House? They've come up with
Yeah.
a mythos corruption mechanism, which I think insight, mythos corruption, it all circles back to a nomenclature issue, and the way that players interpret that nomenclature can become a problem at the table. So the way we handle the sanity mechanic, I like the mechanic itself, and I think that a lot of our players embrace it and they like to go into bouts of madness. The way that we do it, I think, is more cartoonish or more oriented on temporary actions versus like you are having some kind of real DSM-5 mental illness, which is when I think it can become a big problem at the table and for an audience that's listening to a podcast.
Right.
You can give as many content warnings as you want, but if you're talking about schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder in a dismissive way or
Right.
in a jokey way, I can see that being a huge issue. It might not be an issue at your home game with 4 people, but it certainly will be an issue for a broader audience. So I've tried to be more mindful of that. I think we have more temporary actions or things like you're fleeing or you feel like you can be the hero or fight this thing. We
It's
had
funny.
one. Yeah.
That's my. I have boiled it down to when you lose that 5 sanity, fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
Those are.
Yeah.
That's just. That's just your what you're picking one of those 3. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And because that empowers the character to make a choice.
Yeah.
And B, it totally avoids the sort of infantilizing of mental health issues that
Right.
that I think are rightly offensive to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so. I've thought about the nomenclature issue a little bit. I think that one of the words I've thought about using just as a replacement for sanity is significance, because really that's what cosmic horror is about. Is you're insignificant in this universe with huge planetary monsters. So I think that if your significance starts at 60, that means that you feel like you're someone in this world and you need validation and praise and you need to be part of social groups. But then when your significance is 0, that's when you're no longer really functional in this world. Right. So I could see the nomenclature changing. I don't know that the mechanism itself is broken, but I could see that some of the implementation could be hurtful and that some of the just naming of, bouts of madness and permanent insanity could be hurtful to people. I'll be perfectly honest with you. We're still using that nomenclature in season 2, but it is something that I've thought more about. I think especially after Prospero House kind of released their adaptation of the rules. It's just something that, every time something comes up, usually it's listening to someone else playing. I'll think, oh, I wonder if that might have been a little more sensitive or would have stayed away from this topic if the naming was a little bit different. But at the same time,
it's hard. It's hard too, because you want to. I mean, well, I don't. I tend to ignore rules, but like a good GM is like, I want to follow these rules because the players understand these rules, and these are kind of the rules that we're living by during this game. And so I get that, if this is how we understand it, this is how we want to do it. But I'm also, like I said, I don't want the rules to get in the way of the story I want to tell. And the story I want to tell is one that is inclusive and doesn't, make anybody feel bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something you should think about before you ever launch a public podcast. But, to be honest, as our audience has grown, I've become more and more sensitive to, we have a lot of different people from different backgrounds with different experiences listening to this show. So we need to be thoughtful about how we're representing things, how we're preparing them for the content that's going to be following. So yeah, it's something that's on my mind all the time. I think that, sometimes the implementation is temporary blood bloodlust, things like that, and the players enjoy that. But what I haven't done in a game is, I know there are some mechanisms for like receiving psychiatric treatment and
Right.
psychology. I've stayed away from those because I think that's when it starts to kind of seep over into real world mental illness. So I've tried to avoid that type of like you're being committed type result to
Right.
sanity mechanics, and kept them more pulpy or temporary, or it kind of sounds weird to say focused on violence, but like focused on the action that they're currently engaged in the story rather
Yeah, I
than
love in Horror on the Orient Express, every time you get on the train, it is such a luxurious, wonderful experience that you gain sanity.
yeah.
And I think that's that's sort of, I've sort of taken that of like, whenever you have downtime, you're
Yeah,
gonna gain sanity,
that makes
unless
sense.
the downtime is terrible, like you're trying to hike through a blizzard or something.
Yeah,
But like, if you're having a nice travel experience, or if you're having a nice rest, you're gonna gain some sanity back, that sort of thing.
that makes sense. You're making me like my significance coining
Yeah,
better, because I
yeah,
think that could happen. So if you're away from the horrors for an extended period of time, you're going to start to feel more significant in the world in which you operate, and then that deteriorates again when you're reminded of all these terrible things that exist out there in the world.
yeah. I actually
But
like the significance thing a great deal. I think that's a neat idea. Um, how so? And again, this is a really interesting conversation to have with somebody who is new to this arena,
yeah,
because something that I struggle with is keeping the mythos fresh. Because there's always somebody going, "Oh, that's a Byakhee,"
yeah,
or "That's this," and so I, it has become one of my trademarks. I created the parrot shark, and that's just because I decided, like, when you are faced with this horror, your brain just tries to associate whatever it can with it. And so I
yeah.
describe mythos stuff just by like weird sticking two animals together and that sort of thing. And people keep asking me, is that a Byakhee? Was it a whatever? And I'm like, I don't know, and I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't want, like, I think it becomes it becomes like, I don't know, it becomes just like an orc or
Yeah.
a knoll or whatever. If you're like, oh, that's a Byakhee, it doesn't, it gets rid of what I think is at the root of Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
And so how do you kind of play around with that?
That's interesting, because we're taking things that are supposed to be indescribable, and now because they're so known, they're utterly describable. Everyone knows what they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
If you see the color yellow, you're like, oh, okay, the king in yellow is
Yeah.
going to be
Yeah.
part of
That's a
this.
great way to put it. We've made, they're so indescribable, they're highly describable.
Yeah,
Like,
and so I think that our table had an advantage just among us in that we were all new to it. So all these monsters, other than Cthulhu, they were pretty new to us. But being mindful of the audience, and Will Baser, who I mentioned earlier, who really worked on the greater lore, kind of the thing that we were driving toward with the cult and everything. He invented a new mythos entity, a new god. So that was completely fresh. And I think after
right.
the season ended, listeners were asking him, like, do you have a character sheet? Do you have background information on that god? And that was a cool thing. But at the same time, we brought in a lot of established mythos monsters and gods in different ways. But I think one thing that we did well, and I'm biased obviously, is that maybe because of our ignorance about how they're supposed to behave, I think we put really unique spins on all of the major mythos entities that we used. I'm very happy with our implementation of a dark young. If you have no interest in listening to our show, 21 episodes is a big commitment. I would encourage you to just listen to the finale, episode 21. I think that the way we treated two major mythos characters in that one episode is really cool. Like creating new representations of them and just having them behave in really kind of fun, interesting ways. But, as we get deeper into this, playing more and more and more games, having, how many times are we going to use ghouls? I could see that being an issue. So I like the parrot shark philosophy. Like, we're going to invent new stuff. We might use some of the established things, but I think the coolest thing you can do is to have a bunch of yellow stuff, and then it has nothing to do with the king in yellow, right? So,
Well, any Call of Cthulhu GM, have at least 2 sessions of your game where nothing Mythos happens at all.
Yeah.
Just that's important. It's the I am highly of the opinion in any game that man is the true monster. And
Yes.
so I look for ways to hammer that home where, there's nothing Mythos, or maybe there's a cult, because fighting off 20 cultists is always a good scene.
Yes.
Invading the cult temple, and it doesn't need to have any monsters. It can just be, that can just be a good old fashioned butt kicking, and that's always a good scene. But not having it be the monster of the week every episode is, I think, super important.
And I think it's fun to have a moment, depending on your own game and campaign. And this happens all the time where the players have a moment where they say, are our characters the monsters? Because that happened a few times for us, especially toward the end. Like, are we stopping something good from happening? I think that's really cool to give them that moral conflict. And I think that's how you keep anything fresh, is just like, how can we do this differently than it's ever been done? Or at least that you know of. I mean, there's so many podcasts now and Twitch streams that maybe everything's been done to some extent, but at least we're going to put our own original spin on things.
Yeah. And I think as long as you're you and the, I'm big on the GM and the players both wanting to play the same kind of game, because I think that's an important conversation to make sure that if I want to run a moral, a moral story, kind of very intense emotional game, and my players want to hack and slash, that's not going to work. But so how can I make sure that the players want to play, we're both playing the same game? Because otherwise it can be discordant. But you can really, you can sort of say, okay, what do you guys want? What are you looking for? And give the players what they want, and that'll make a great game.
Yeah. I think what you've said there, it's one reason that we have an expanded cast in season 2. It's not that I have any gripe about the season 1 cast, but I thought that we could use a little more balance of investigation and action. So I thought that putting this particular group into a pulpy setting would be a really nice kind of mix of personalities and play styles. So I think that we're getting a lot out of that. If it's bad, it's going to be on me. It means I did a bad job editing, because so far the players are doing a tremendous job, and Graham's writing a really interesting campaign.
Well, Cup, you have been so generous with your time. Thank you so much. So we close every episode with the same questions. These will be interesting because you haven't been GMing that long. So,
okay.
So what is your favorite system to run?
Okay, well, yes, of course, this is interesting for me because I've only run Call of Cthulhu. I've played Alien and Cthulhu Dark and a few other systems, but I've only run Call of Cthulhu. So I think what I'll tell you is that maybe what I aspire to run is...
that's the next question.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I would love to run Chris Spivey's game, Haunted West.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I just got it. It's this huge tome of a book.
It's 400 pages of greatness.
It's so thick. Yeah. Look at this thing. It's
I had Chris on a couple episodes ago just talking about the game, and he on the show mentioned that he has at some point worked on not his own thing, but with somebody else on a superhero Cthulhu game, which I want so bad.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's cool.
But so Haunted West is fantastic. I really like it.
I think, staying in the West, I would love to run that. And getting out of the West, I'm interested in Morkborg. I barely know anything about it, but I think that it's grim, and I'm interested.
I'm an old Warhammer Fantasy roleplay guy, so Morkborg is like a much more streamlined version of that.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I love, I'm a low fantasy all the way. High fantasy is super boring to me. I'm just
got it.
I don't find it interesting, but low fantasy I love. So that's the system that you would want to run. All right. Well, we close every episode with the Space Jam question. So, Cup, aliens have invaded the Earth. They are going to destroy the planet where I keep all of my stuff, unless you run a wildly entertaining 4-hour game. What are you running?
Oh, wildly entertaining 4 hour game. I'm definitely running Down Darker Trails for you. And I think I'm going to do it probably. I want to do a Down Darker Trails game in like the early 1900s. So a lot of the games are in the 1860s,
Right.
1870s. I want to do like Wyoming in 1908, something like that, but use the Down Darker Trails system. So I think what I'm doing is I'm taking you on some kind of early archaeological expedition from Miskatonic University out to Wyoming to look for dinosaur bones or something.
Oh, I like it. That's a really neat answer. All right. So you can find Ain't Slayed Nobody. Their podcast is all over the place. It's I find it very entertaining. I really like it. I'll be honest. I had to stop listening when I started running down darker trails because I was super afraid of just stealing all of your ideas. Which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with. If you're
Yeah,
a
exactly.
GM, listen to Ain't Slayed Nobody. Listen to us at Quest and Chaos. Take what we're doing and make it better.
Yeah, use our monsters, use everything.
Exactly. That is 100% okay. It's less okay if you're doing a streamed game. That was my challenge. Was like I didn't want to get into plagiarism.
Yeah.
But in a home game, go to town. Take anything we do and make it better.
Absolutely.
Have fun with it. But so you can find all of their stuff at ain'tslayednobody.com. You've talked a little bit about season 2. When does that start?
Okay, so we're getting a lot of firsts here. I have not announced this yet, but I think I'm going to tell you what I have in mind. March
Nobody
1st.
To this, so.
Yeah, no, that's not true. March 1st. So it'll be bi-weekly and it's going to start March 1st. I was originally going to do February 1st, so some of our fans will be disappointed by the delay, but just for like balancing my life with the show, I want to have at least 4 or 5 episodes in the can before we release episode 1. And to get there, I need that extra month. So yeah, March 1, and then it'll be the first and third Tuesday every month until the campaign's done.
Nice. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm about to stop running down darker trails so I can listen again.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm very excited about that. And anything else we should look for from you guys?
I'm really proud of our World War Cthulhu London campaign on Patreon. Obviously, it's really tough to jump into paying someone if you're not familiar with them. But if you do jump into the main arc and you like it, I'm really proud of that. We're going to run, it's not a campaign, but it's a series of one-shots with Rena Henze, and they are playing a detective, Max Hammett. It's almost like a detective series, which I think is
a noir sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it started with Love You to Death, which is a one-on-one scenario that was published by Chaosium it was Does Love Forgive? I'm trying to remember which one's the scenario and which one's the book. But we started with that, and then London Carlisle wrote part 2, and Kat Jenkins, she ran part 3 out of the same book, that one-on-one series. And I think we might have one more, maybe Scott Dorward or Bridget Jeffries will run that for us. But yeah, it's going to be
weird. Being not to keep, by the way, this show is like the Return of the King. There are like 8 endings.
No, that's no worries.
It's one of my trademarks. But like it must be strange sometimes to be a keeper at a table with these players who have been playing Cthulhu, but like London Carlisle has been running Cthulhu and playing Cthulhu and that sort of thing for such a long time. That just must be a really weird feeling sometimes.
Yeah, so I have imposter syndrome every time I, sit down and run something for, Scott Dorward, who's, one of the kind of main characters in this whole history of Call of Cthulhu. So, I think I get through that by mostly running edited work. So I know that if I can't hold my own, at least I can cobble something together that doesn't make us look terrible. But yeah, the streams it's a different different nature, a different level of prep, and I think they're very fun. It's, some people really like the one shots better because we're a little more reckless, and you get a resolution in 1 to 3 episodes or one single stream. So yeah, I think a little more dabbling in streaming maybe is on the horizon, but I'm like zeroed in right now on season 2, so it's hard for me to predict what else we'll be doing this year.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Everybody go check out Ain't Slayed Nobody, and keep the game moving. Goodbye,
Awesome.
internet friends.
Thanks, everybody.